this computer. Okay, we had been talking about Judas and Maccabees, and we had turned and read from Daniel chapter 12, and also in First Maccabees, we also turned there and read. And what we saw as we were looking at those, that we had the beginning of that of the um, second stage of Judas Maccabees' career, the work of his crowning career, the recovery of the capital and purification of the temple. And our next point was point number 9. Remember this, that while this was going on, Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth dies. And it's just at the hour of Judas's trial, tidings were received giving word of the death of Antiochus. Now, Greek and Jewish historians write in ascribing to him boldly, to him bodily and mentally suffering repulsive to the extreme. He was tortured by a loathsome disease, and the disease was a natural result of his excesses, and so he was tormented in mind by the memories of his crimes, and he was faced with the fact that his schemes had gone to wreck. So it was cosmic that the race that he had vowed that he would exterminate, had been the Jewish people, had routed his army. And so he was cognizant that the religion he boasted has ceased to be reestablished in Jerusalem. And so we find that the son of that of Antiochus Epiphanes IV was placed on the throne. And Lysias, the viceroy and kingmaker of the day, placed the young son of the late tyrant upon the throne. And so the rightful heir was the son of the elder brother of Antiochus. So the rightful heir to the throne was at the time held as a hostage in Rome. And this is something that we see that plays out a lot. And even when we go back to the Old Testament, we find that that's what happens among the kings of not only of that of Egypt and places like that, but also we would find that would take place in that of the tribes of Judah, because it became power and greed. And so we see some of that today. The third stage of the career of, as we called him, Judas the Hammer, the reduction of the citadel in Jerusalem. Judas deemed the occasion of the death of Antiochus as a favorable one for the reduction of the citadel of Judea. The citadel had been a thorn in the flesh to Judas and to all the Jews. And so Judas gathered his forces and he pressed the siege. And so the garrison sent out an urgent plea to Lysias, smarting upon the remembrance of his own overthrow of 2 years past, that Lysias made a levy of the whole force of his kingdom. And sometimes when I read about this, because when I was a kid, we was watching TV, we would watch the French, Foreign Legion and so forth, and we would play French Foreign Legion. Didn't know what they really were. We just knew that they were in the army or so forth. And so that's the idea that you get here, is that they're left there. And so there's going to be really an overthrow of where they are. And so the forces siege there, the press the siege. And so this garrison was telling Lysias, we need some help. So the Syrian host consisted of 100,000 footmen, 20,000 horses, and most dreaded of all, 32 elephants. Elephants can just topple under things. So basically that's what they would see. And so they were first introduced by Alexander the Great and were now introduced into Palestine. And so this made a deep impression upon the people, especially their huge bulk, big old thing like that. The wooden towers on their backs, and fighting men hurling darts from the animals' backs. And so with Judas' 8,000 men, the odds were too great. And so when Judas fought, success still followed, but in the long run, numbers and equipment prevailed. So Eleazar, can't think of his name, a brother of Judas, observed that one elephant was larger and acre richly compares to that of the others. And so he erroneously concluded that this elephant carried the king. So he determined to save the people by sacrificing himself and bursting through that of the ring of all the warriors. Judas rushes under the beast of his spear upward unto the carcass. And the beast crashed to the ground, killing Eleazar and as well as many of his foes. And so this Eleazar was the first of the five uh, Matthias' sons to die. And so the outcome of the siege was really unfortunate for Judas and the Jews. Now, Jerusalem, because of all the battles that they had been fighting, had been reduced to their last extremity. And so Judas had previously imprudently fortified and supplied the city and had made the temple itself a fortress as strong as Accra, held by the Assyrians, or not Assyrians, the Syrians, not Assyrians, Syrians. And so the besiegers soon wearied at the obstinate defense of the Jews, and the scarcity of food in a wasted country with so many to feed caused the besiegers to even more become more impatient. So, when you attack somebody, I mean, we've learned, I guess, in our military that when you attack somebody, make sure, you have enough food. And that's the reason why we have the capacity where we bring food to the soldiers. Lysias abandoned the policy of persecution and he adopted a policy of conciliation. So Lysias went to his king and represented the scarcity of food, the strength of the city, the daily losses, and the need of their presence at home. He proposed to make peace with the Jews. Over in First Maccabees, I didn't have that one marked. Over in First Maccabees, chapter 6, if you want to go over there, and I'll have to find it because I wasn't on chapter 6. And listen to, let's see, chapter 6 and verse 58, that he points out to us there in Maccabees 6:68. I want to mark it also in my book here so that I'll have that. And I say 58. I said 68. No, it's 58. It says there, so let us offer, he says, terms and make peace with them and their whole nation. He goes on and says, let us guarantee their right to follow their laws and customs, for it was our abolition of the very customs and laws that roused this resentment produced all of these consequences. So when you and I look at that, we stop for a moment because of our knowledge of the New Testament and our knowledge of that of the Romans. That's what the Romans did. I mean, they would also allow them to have the freedoms that they wanted to have. I'm trying to get situated, Jim. So the Jews accepted the offer terms, and the Assyrians withdrew. So in the meantime, though, Demetrius appeared in Syria and claimed that he was the rightful heir of the throne. So now he was the rightful heir, and he raised a successful rebellion. So Lysias and his puppet shared a like Oriental fate. So Demetrius, the new king of Syria, set forth a new policy. So here he comes. He abandoned the policies of that of Antiochus, and he was less brutal but more subtle. He set himself to foster internal feuds. So he used the Jews as his instruments. And so the party of compromise, the Hellenists, raised its head. The Chasdim party was discredited, and the Hellenist sympathizer asked is the war to go on forever? And so was the land to have no rest? And so they asked, could not an agreement be reached whereby royal authority could be observed and their own laws and customs could be observed? And so we would find that that's what eventually will happen among that of the Romans. In the Hellenist party, though, they were gathered all the half-hearted Jews and all who envied superior worth and all who longed for peace. And so the Maccabees could depend only upon the most zealous and uncompromising, not always even upon them. And so even in the high priestly family, there were found base twos to undermine the authority of Judas. So then we go to that of the fourth stage of Judas, the hammer was his victory over Nicanor, chief commander of the Syrians. Nicanor was the chief commander of the Syrians, and he at one time had met Judas and took a strong liking to him personally, and he was furious in his hate of the Jews generally. And so now again to stop, come up to date, and there's always been this problem among the Jews and the Syrians anyway. Even when I went to graduate school and we studied this same thing, between the Testaments, even then, back in the 70s, there was all kinds of problems that were going on. So we would find that he sought to induce Judas to abandon what Nicanor called a hopeless cause. And so Nicanor at last let loose the ferocity of his nature in unsparing massacre. So finally, at the hands of Judas, the man he professed to love, and notice we said that at the very beginning that he loved him, he was beaten. And so the battleground was Bethhorn, where Judas had gained his first victory, but this was to be his last victory. So with a strong solemnity, Judas the Hammer directed his soldiers to the broken faith of the heathen and to the sure promises of that of God. So he led his army in prayer as they were about to fight, and Judas was victorious. And so again, we find that because we don't hear anything from heaven, there's nothing here being said, no prophet, no directions directly from heaven, but still there was the avenue of that of prayer, and so they prayed. So when they prayed, we find that they were victorious. And so the field stage of his Judas the Hammer's career was his appeal to Rome for help. Judas saw that in the end, his patriots must succumb unless foreign allies can be found. Now, again, as I said, the Karn or the Romans had reached that of Judea, and I think I'm saying that right. It looks like the Cain or Cain. I don't know if I might lighten that up and go back and read that again for myself to make sure that that's what that word is supposed to be. Is your CAME or the Romans, Jim? Okay. So, but the Romans had reached Judea. And again, like I said, when the Romans take over, they're going to allow the Jews, as long as they don't cause a problem, to enjoy their laws and do their customs. So the Romans were ever ready to improve their position and to improve every opportunity to weaken other kingdoms that might be strong enough to resist or thwart their ambition. So the Romans readily agreed to the alliance. And so Judas showed what seemed to be wisdom in the statesman eye, but little did he know that the 2.5 centuries later that the Romans would destroy the city and temple, and so their site was sought. And so he didn't know that. And a lot of times we don't know what we get into when we sign agreements, even with landlords and things of that sort in our country. The same is true as when you're with one country to another country. So Judas that suffered defeat and the death at the hands of the Syrians, and Judas's alliance with the Romans may have weakened his position with the conservative party. Only Judas had made, had been surprised. The former is most likely he had been weakened, and so to say the least, Judas had only 800 men when he faced 2,000 footmen and 2,000 horsemen at Elysium. And so his faithful follower urged a retreat. Judas replied, and this is from this is from First Maccabees 9 and verse 10. And so let me back up. Because the reason I'm going to back up, I have two of these things, two of the Maccabees, one open the book, and then I have it on two open on my computer. And when you go back and read them, like some of the wording changed from my other one, the one I read, it says, then Judas said, God forbid that I should do this thing and flee away from them. If our time be come, let us die manifestly for our brethren, and let us not stain our honor. And so you notice there, this is what he's doing. He's replying to that of the Romans. And notice that he says, God forbid. So he is calling upon Jehovah God. And when he prayed, it's for a moment, Judas seemed to snatch a victory out of the jaws of disaster. But the left wing of the Syrians closed in, and the little band of Jews were hemmed around. So the enemy swarmed around, and from morning till evening, the unequal struggle continued. Then there was silence. And then in Maccabees 9:19, it says there, basically, I'm going to read it, then we'll go back to the outline. It says, here it says, then Jonathan and Simon took Judas, their brother, and buried him in the sepulchre of his fathers in Modan. Now, with his back turned to the field and his face to the foe, I don't know where that quote comes from, but it's not in Maccabees as far as I can find. But Judas lay dead. And so his brothers recovered the body, and amid lamentations of the faithful, it was laid in a burial place at Moden with his father, according to Maccabees 9:19. So a retrospect of Judas's life reflects the following to us. Number one, he accomplished so much by means so small, no soldier in history can be placed before Judas Maccabees. Between the day on which he stood at his father's side when his father slew the apostate Jew till that of his own death, only 6 years intervened. And so the achievements of the past 6 years consisted of number one, 5 pitched battles and as many victories. Successful campaigns against the Philistines, the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Arabians. So from the dust of hopelessness, he raised his people to a position and to a liberty never enjoyed since the armies of Nebuchadnezzar had come past the city of David. So Judas the hammer now was dead. So the next Maccabean would be Jonathan the cunning. So he becomes in command of the army. And conditions following the death of Judas was really bad because the Syrians had swarmed all over the land, so the renegades everywhere regained place in that of power. So two of Matthias's sons had already fallen, and so Jonathan was chosen to succeed Judas, and he was the youngest son. But yet again, among that of the Jewish people, that wasn't anything new because we go back and we find Josiah was a very young king. And so he came to be known as the cunning, as Judas was known as the soldier. Jonathan was known as a statesman. And so he gathered the remnant of his army and he retired into the wilderness in the south. And so then he sent the women and the children beyond the Jordan that they might be safe. And he placed his other brother, Jonathan or John, they called over them. And Jonathan was surprised and killed by the Arabs. So Jonathan rushed across the river and inflicted a bloody revenge upon the Arabs. I don't know how in the world. I probably should have looked that up in reference to two boys being named the same. As Judas was known as the soldier, Jonathan was a statesman, but yet we find he placed his brother Jonathan over them. And so when he went over, so I might be some wrong there in the notes. When I was reading that, I kept thinking that how would he have two? But again, he was called John Maccabees. Jonathan rushed across the river and he inflicted this revenge upon the Arabs, and he next defeated that of the Syrians. Bacchides, the ablest of the enemies, met him at the fords, and it was a Sabbath day. Titus calculated on the traditional reverence of the day, 12 hours, 6 o'clock Friday night and 6 o'clock Saturday night. So to enable him to complete his toil around the patriot forts, because he knew that they would not be doing anything because it's the Sabbath, they're supposed to rest. So Jonathan charged the forces, broke through and swimming the river, escaped back to Judea. And so the hope of the Chasm was revived. And so Bacchides disgusted with the work to be done and the dues with which he had to do, and concluded a treaty with that of Jonathan and returned to Syria. So Jonathan became the master of Palestine, the apostates and the half-hearted one trump before the righteous avengers of the country and faith. And so within 2 years, Jonathan had made himself master of most of Palestine. He had become a power to be reckoned with in the light of the turmoil and civil war that was coming upon that of Syria. And we have to stop though that because of the defeats that Judas had, that remember they were really outnumbered by the Syrians. So the rise of Antiochus, an impostor in Syria, changed the fortunes of Jonathan. Now, an impostor claiming to be a son of Antiochus, Epiphanes IV, presented himself to the Syrians, and he was acknowledged by many of them. On the other hand, you had Demetrius and bid for Jonathan's support. Now, here they were. When Jonathan came, they were fighting. Now he's asking for his support. He officially acknowledged Jonathan's Christendom, as they would call it, over Judea. In other words, he was the prince over it. So he conferred upon him the right to buy troops, and so he liberated the patriots who were prisoners. But Antiochus, the rival king, proceeded to outbid that of Demetrius in reference to getting these the patriots out of prisons. So Antiochus sent Jonathan a crown of gold and a purple robe, conferring upon him the title friend of the king. So Jonathan became high priest. Now, the high priest had always remained in the family of Aaron. So here is the change that's going to take place in reference to that of the high priesthood. So the heathen pretender Antiochus suggested the matter. And again, because he's so subtle, that is Jonathan was, then he took it up and he became. The suggestion was not only entertained, but it adopted. And so the reasons for the sudden changes in the priesthood were number one, messed up. Number one, ever since the captivity, the Jews had been accustomed to associate the high priesthood with possession of political power. And so the family of the high priest had become hopelessly discredited. So the Maccabees had become bound up with the very life or the nation. So the struggle for existence had come to supersede or override every other consideration. In other words, they did not see the position that God had given the high priest. And so an adventurous soldier came to be seated in a chair of Aaron, proclaimed as the friend of the heathen king, whose reputed father had set himself to be the suppressor of the worship and exterminator of the people of Jehovah. So the consequences of the change in the priesthood were great. And the reason for that is because, again, those Pharisees and Sadducees, they had existed. And so the mental tendency which gave the birth to the Pharisees and Sadducees, and so had existed for a long time. So the reunion of the ecclesiastical and political power in one power meant that the priestly tendency issued into a political party, that is the Sadducitical. And so the scribes, and so when we stop and think about the scribal tendency developed in a religious party, the Pharisees. In other words, we come up again with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the Charism party had been the sole supporter of the Maccabees, but now Jonathan was allied really with the Sadducee party. And almost every priest was a Sadducee, and almost every scribe was a Pharisee. Now, when it comes up to that of the New Testament, we understand that the Pharisees and Sadducees and what they believe, because they're pointed out to us even in history what they believe. But we will find also that it was mostly time, again, the Sadducees had that of the priesthood. So all was well now with Jonathan. Jonathan appeared with an Egyptian princess at the marriage of their pretender and was welcomed as the king's friend. In other words, there he is with that purple robe and that crown of gold on his head. So all sides, Jonathan's armies were victorious. So trouble, though, continued in Syria. And so, again, we can see from that of all the history that we have in the Old Testament, and even see between the Testaments, that there's always been problems in that land. And so the pretender succeeded pretender. The puppet followed the puppet, you know. And so there come up this fellow, and his name is Tryphon. He is an able and unscrupulous commander and was the kingmaker of the day. Now, he was a usurper of the Syrian throne. And so his proper name was Diodotus, And the surname was Tryphon, was given to him or adopted by him after his succession to power. And so he was a native of Corinna. And so we are told a number of things about him in the Maccabees. And so we're going to turn over to First Maccabees, chapter 11 and verse 39. You have those in your notes, Jim? Okay. And you got the new notes. If you go over there, and I marked a number of passages, not only just 39. It says there in verse 39, a certain Typho, Trypho, I got a P-H-O-N, I got an N on mine. It's spelled both ways because I remember looking it up. Formerly of the party of Alexander, aware of the disaffection of all the forces toward Demetrius, went to Malchu, the Arab chieftain, who had charged the child of who had charge of the child Antiochus, Alexander's son, and kept pressing him to hand the boy over to him to be made king, and says to his father. He also informed Malchu of all the measures Demetrius was taking and his unpopularity with his troops. There he remained for some time. Meanwhile, Jonathan sent to King Demetrius, and this is reason why we want to read 39 to 50 even here, says that meanwhile he sent to Demetrius, King Demetrius requested him to withdraw from the citadel in Jerusalem and from the fortresses, the garrisons which were constantly harassing Israel. And so Demetrius sent Jonathan this reply. He says, I will not only meet your request, but when opportunity arises, I will do you and your people the highest honor. Now, be so good as to send men to support me, for all my troops are in revolt. So Jonathan dispatched 3,000 fighting men to Antioch, and the king was much relieved at their arrival. The citizens poured into the center of the city, 120,000 strong, bent on killing the king. He took refugees in the palace. While the citizens seized control of the streets and fighting broke out, King Demetrius called the Jews to be assistants, and they rallied to him at once. And then they dispersed all over the city and slaughtered that day as many as 100,000, setting the city on fire and taking much booty, and thus they saved the king's life. Now, see, they killed a lot of people. When you turn over, let's see, I wanted to read, verse 49, 50. When the citizens saw that the Jews had the city completely at their mercy, their courage failed them, and they clamored to the king to accept their surrender and stop the Jews fighting against them in the city. So, we've had enough, other words, what they would say. If you were to go to chapter 12, begin there in verse 39, Trypho now aspired to be king of Asia. He meant to rebel against King Antiochus and assume the crown himself, but he was afraid that Jonathan would fight to prevent this, so he cast about for some means of capturing and killing him. Set out and reached Bethshan, and Jonathan marched out to meet him, and with 40,000 picked troops, and he also reached Bethshan. Trypho, seeing that Jonathan had a large force with him, was afraid to attack. So he received him honorably and commended him to all his friends, gave him presents, and ordered his friends and his troops to obey Jonathan as they would himself. He said to Jonathan, why have you put all these men to so much trouble when we are not at war? Send them home now and choose a few to accompany you, and come with me to Ptolemais. I will hand it over to you with all your fortresses, the rest of the troops, and all the officials, and I will leave the country. This is the only purpose of my coming. Jonathan took him at his word and did as he said. He dismissed his forces, and they returned to Judea. He kept back 3,000 men, with whom he left 2,000 in Galilee, while 1,000 accompanied him. When Jonathan entered Ptolemais, the citizens closed the gate, seized him, and put the sword all who entered with him. Who does? Come. Typho's giving me the sneezes. Typho sent a force of infantry and cavalry into Galilee to the Great Plain to wipe out all of Jonathan's men. They now learned that Jonathan had been seized and was lost along with the escorts, but they put heart into one another and marched in close formation, ready for battle. So he points that out to us there, that they were ready for battle. And so Typhon by treason and successive wars gained supreme power. He killed Antiochus, or Antiochus, and he assumes that of the throne. So with marvelous skill, Jonathan stirred his way through every storm and ever came forward stronger than ever before. He well earned the title of Jonathan the Cunning. Now, his end came, as we said, Jonathan met one more unscrupulous than himself, and Jonathan fell to that treachery, and that was Tryphon that we read in the rest of those passages. That's the reason I read them, because they're not given here. Matter of fact, I don't know about Jim, but I'm going to change mine to 51. First Maccabees 11:39 to 51. If I ever teach this again, I'll make sure I read that. But here's the explanation. Tryphon persuaded Jonathan to visit him and told him much on that pretense, and then he wished to add to his territories. And so no sooner was the Jewish prince within its walls than his guards were slaughtered, and he was made a prisoner. And so Palestine was paralyzed. Its enemies were jubilant, and 3 of 5 sons now have been slaughtered. So the 4th one, Jonathan, was in prison. Now again, this 4th one, sometimes I said he's called John. And so Simon the Jewel was the next Maccabean to rise to a position of leadership and command among that of the Hebrews. Now some of the characteristics of that of Simon the Jewel included his age. Simon was second in age, and yet he was quite selfish. He had subordinated himself to the soldier Judas and the statesman Jonathan, and so his hour had now come, as it was so often does to him who knows how to wait. And so he waited. It's like there we have those who play football and other kind of sports, and all the stars play until you get way ahead, and then they get way ahead, then they let you. Well, the same is true here in reference to that. He waited. Sometimes you have a star waiting. I remember it was the Green Bay Packers, wasn't it? But, that fellow from his name left me now. Mississippi played the quarterback. They told him they wanted him to teach Aaron, how to play. Give him some advice, and he says, well, I'm here to play football, not to be a coach or something along that line. But Aaron Rodgers waited, and so since he waited, he has become a great quarterback. But we find that when we look at this, it reminds him he assembled the people at Jerusalem and reminded them of what his family had done. Now again, there's 4 sons. And so he declared that he would avenge the people, and also he declared that he would avenge that of the sanctuary. So if you go over to chapter 13 of Maccabees, now in my this one here that I have, and I'll show you that I have the book, and it puts at a title at the top, says the high priesthood of Simon. Now over in my other one, I didn't see a title. I may have just missed it, but I think I did. Okay, chapter 13, verses 3 through 6. No, it's not one there. It says, and gave them exhortation, saying, you yourselves know what great things I and my brethren in my father's house has done for the laws and the sanctuary, the battles, also the troubles which we have seen. By reason whereof all my brethren are slain for Israel's sake, and I am left alone. Now therefore be it far from me. He may have given himself away there, because he says none of his brothers are well. He's the last one. Now, therefore, be far from me that I should spare my own life in any time of trouble, for I am no better than my brethren. Doubtless, I will avenge my nation and the sanctuary and our wives and our children, for all the heathen are gathered to destroy us. And so we find that people responded by calling on him to be to head the nation in its now extremity. And so he sent a large ransom to Tryphon upon his pledge to set Jonathan free on receiving it. So Tryphon took the money and put Jonathan to death. 23 years had now passed. So 4 or 5 sons were dead. One remained, that's Simon the Jewel. Now the time is 143 BC. It's going to be soon that we're going to see that Rome takes over about 80 years from now, if I'm not mistaken with my subtraction there. So there's a turn of events that was at hand. Tryphon and retired to Antioch. And as a preliminary to the final subjugation of Palestine, he closed his career of kingmaker by the murder of his puppet and his own elevation to the throne. So at the point that Simon declared um, in favor of Demetrius, the rightful sovereign, his overtures were gladly accepted. He was confirmed by Demetrius in the high priesthood as a friend of the king. He was promised a perpetual immunity from imperial taxation at 142 BC. And so this treaty recognized the Jews as an independent people for the first time since their conquest by Nebuchadnezzar 364 years before. Now, again, this type of thing is taking place. It's going to be a buildup in reference to that of when the Romans take over. Now, the people of Israel had begun to write in the instruments or in public records, as we call them. And over in First Maccabees chapter 13 and verse 42, it says, then the people of Israel began to write in their instruments. It's not in a quote in our notes, and contracts in the first year of Simon the high priest, the governor and leader of the Jews. So we would find there that at last the war of independence, so gloriously begun by the rather, was successfully ended by the last of the sons. But it was purely a secular state and not a religious commonwealth, as had been the idea of the, quote, the godly. So Simon's reign was successful, and so with energy, even though of all the compromises and other things that had been done, he was successful. With energy, he improved his position. He set out to fortify the strong places already possessed. But now you have to remember now, again, he is not the rightful high priest, cannot be, because he's a descendant of the Maccabees. And so instead of Aaron. So we find that already possessed, and to clear out the wall's nest, they had so long been affliction of the peasants of Judea. So he overthrew the old Philistine fortress at Gaza, which had been as a thorn of the side of Israel for 1,000 years. And so he cleansed it of idolatry and planted there a colony and garrison of the Jews on which he could depend. So next he attacked the Syrian garrison in the Acre area there that remained. Now the Syrian garrison had long been a thorn in the flesh of the Jews, so without engines, you know what engines are? It's those things where, you pull all the way back and put the rocks on them. That's what they called engines. For this reduction, the Maccabees previously had been compelled to content themselves with erecting a rival fort on the temple of Moriah to watch and to restrain it. And so Simon surrounded the heights in persistent siege. Famine compelled the enemy to surrender. In other words, he cut their food lines off, and therefore they had nothing. So the great enemy was destroyed out of Israel, and there was great rejoicing. Now in First Maccabees 13:51, it says, and entered into the, he's going to give us the date. And I think I found some dates today when I was doing some extra things, and I remember, I still got them right over here. Here it is in 51. He says, and he entered into the 23rd day of the second month in the 107th and first year with thanksgiving and branches of palm trees and with harps, cymbals, and with viols, hymns and songs, because they were destroyed, because there was destroyed a great enemy of Israel. That's what it says in verse 51. So there it was a time for rejoicing. And I'll try to remember to put these other dates over here that are very special. They're dates. It tells us a number of things about the Maccabees. I'll try to remember to do that. And I guess in the next section. Simon captured the tribal capital of Judah. And so thus Judah was cleared of all the enemies, all of them. So since they were cleared of all of them, then we would find that now they'd be able to do some things in reference to the sanctuary. But again, as I said, you have to remember Simon is not the rightful person to be a high priest. And so we would find that a great convocation was held in 141 BC to express the national sentiment. And so at this point, we find that Simon sent an embassy to Rome. Uh, he sent this embassy to Rome to cultivate a friendship of the power of the West. Well, that was smart on his part in many ways, because eventually Rome is going to rule the world. But the ambassador bore, as evidence of their castor wealth, a shield of gold weighing about at least 100 pounds. So the favor of the republic was won. Rome forwarded a dispatch to Syria and Egypt, as well as all the surrounding potentates, placing the Jewish people under the protection of Rome and forbidding other rulers to do them any harm or fight against them, and commanded them to deliver up any prisoners unto Simon. Now, again, if you go to First Maccabees 15, I think I wrote down there. In verse 21, it says, "If therefore there be any pestilent fellows that have fled from their country unto you." Now, pestilent fellows, you can say whatever you want to say, but if they had fled, what did they flee for? He says, "Deliver from unto Simon the high priest, that he may punish them according to their own law." See, if they deserted and run away and would not battle or fight for them, for their country, then this is what's going to happen. They were going to answer to their own law. So in about 2 years, and Antiochus, the brother of Demetrius, having mastered Typhon, began to cast a covetous eye toward Palestine. Now, he and his brother both had been glad to guarantee Palestine freedom in their hour of adversity. Now he set an evil eye upon the land. So Rome made no protest against the Syrians. Now remember what you said, Rome had forwarded that dispatch to that of the Syrians and the Egyptians. Hey, look, you leave Simon alone. You leave the Jewish people alone. And so, but here they did nothing in reference. We stop and think about that of Palestine. So some of the last notable events in Simon's life included that he became old. He committed the conduct of the campaign in the hands of his two elder sons. And he said, "Be ye instead of me and my brothers." So the two brothers led a force of 20,000 footmen. They had a first-rate cavalry. The son John led the infantry and fell upon the Syrians, and the Syrians could not stand the charge, and the campaign was short, and it was the last notable event, should be, in that of Simon's life. Event, that's what that should be. When you do that of spell check and the editor and everything like that, they don't pick up if you leave a letter off of a word and it's still a word. Like the word level, if you spell it front or backwards, you still spell it right. So there was Ptolemy, Simon's son-in-law, plotted and put Simon to death. Son-in-law, okay? So Ptolemy was a heathen at heart, and so he conceived the project of making himself the head of the Hellenistic forces who had so long been discredited. And so he thus plotted to exterminate the Maccabean family. He succeeded in murdering Simon and the eldest son of Judas. Simon's son John, who commanded at Gaza, had sufficient warning and escaped. Ptolemy held possession of John's mother and his two younger brothers. And so he exposed them and threatened their death if the siege were not raised. And so the aged widow besought John not to think of her, but to avenge her husband and son. So John withdrew the army. Ptolemy then murdered his prisoners and escaped beyond that of Jordan. And thus that ended the family of Mattathias, should be saying Mattathias. And so 2 had fallen in battle, 3 had fallen through treachery, John by the inhospitable Arab, Jonathan by the infamous Ptolemy, and only one shoot of the family tree remained in John, the son of Simon the Jewel. So as he inherited the name, so he inherited the energy of the race. So thus John, Hyrcanus, came to fill the priestly chair and the royal throne, but he well as those who followed were faced with two sects, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they had grown by strength now, because again they were left there in many areas, and therefore in the Jewish area or Jerusalem area, and therefore you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So John Hyrcanus, looking at my time, the son of Simon the Jewel, was next to command these Hebrews. And so some of the facts in reference to John Hyrcanus was, number one, that he was well educated in warfare, diplomacy, and culture. And those three goes well together because, say, for instance, in cultural, is he getting ready to, we'll say, to try to take over another country, another area, and yet those people had a different culture. If he did not destroy their culture, their beliefs and their gods and so forth like that, it would help him as he would so gain that nation, and plus that of diplomacy. And but he had a great army. He came to the throne well equipped for its duties. The treason of Ptolemy had partly frustrated his energy, but Antiochus of Syria seized upon the confusion growing out of the murder of the Maccabees to pour his armies into that of Judea. And so the country was overrun and Jerusalem was besieged. The defense of the city and the pressure of events of Syria caused Antiochus to submit to terms. Now, terms were hard enough on the Jews, but they would not ruin them. John Hyrcanus paid tribute for certain towns that Syria had claimed as belonging to it. We have that same problem today. They'll say, well, that belongs to us. No, it belongs to us. No, it belongs to us. No, it belongs to us. Can't really make up their minds who owns the country. So John also agreed to dismantle the fortifications of Jerusalem. And John Hyrcanus, however, immediately threw off the Syrian yoke. A civil war in Syria rendered her incapable of challenging John. And so if you stop sometimes, when you think about history, we won our freedoms from that of Britain and other countries that were involved in all of that. And then we even had a war between the states, a civil war ourselves. I wonder why Britain and others did not try to overtake us. They did support, I think, give support to the Civil War to make it, the way that it was. John Hyrcanus destroyed the Samaritan temple at Mount Gerizim. And remember that because John chapter 4, the woman there, when she was going to worship it, Jesus said there, God is the spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. And they weren't worshiping in truth. So among his many exploits, John assailed the Samaritans, the sanctuaries on Mount Gerizim in the city of Shechem, and the city of Shechem, not over, laid at its root. And so both failed. And so the sanctuary never rose again, but for 200 years it had stood. So John tried, and so Jesus brings to our remembrance there, in reference to that, he said, not in those mountains, but it'd be in Jerusalem. So John turned south and attacked Edomites. To escape the extermination, they accepted circumcision and incorporation into the Jewish church and nation. So John Hyrcanus forced the conversion of the Edomites, the zealots of the New Testament, the zealots. That needs to be capitalized. They became the zealots of the New Testament, according to Josephus now. We give the reference there to Josephus. And so the forced converts of the one generation became the zealots of the next. So the Edomites of Idumeans became the most vehement zealots of all the Jews. Up there, all the Jews. And so by a strange coincidence, the last independent king of the Jews was an Edomite. His name was Herod the Great. Although the Edomite's son was associated in the everlasting shame of trial and condemnation of Jesus. The compulsory converts of that of John Hyrcanus were the most uncompromising of all the defenders of that of Jerusalem. So if we were to go over to Luke, I'm on the computer to do that. Luke 19 and verse 43 and 44, we find there, he says, for the days shall come upon thee, and thy enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee around, and keep thee on every side, and shall lay thee even up with the ground, and thy children with thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knowest not the time of thy visitation. And so basically, this is what took place. Other exploits of that of John included that of he conquered all the Transjordan. I think I want to just change that to the Transjordan Palestine. Do that. That had originally belonged to the 12 tribes. And so the territory of the two tribes and a half were once again brought under that of Jewish dominion. So none of the subjugated the people fretted against their subjugation, save the Samaritans. And so I wonder sometimes when I go back and I read some of this history about the Samaritans, is the apostles were to go to Jerusalem, Judea, and then to the Samaritans. So John thus besieged Samaria, surrounded it with a trench and double wall, and set down to starve it to surrender. And Samaria appealed first to Syria and then to Egypt. But the armies dispelled, but the armies dispatched were dispelled. You remember now what Rome had already told Egypt and that of Syria. So the Samaria was destroyed, and so the hate between the Samaritans and the Jews were intensified. Now, again, we have to remember that because we understand, we try to understand and put it that way when we study the New Testament, that the Jews and the Gentiles hated one another. But here, because of what the Jews has done, they have destroyed Samaria. And so that here's this hate between that of the Samaritans and the Jews, like that of the Gentiles and the Jews, or the Romans, the Gentiles specifically. Also, but the people in Rome again were the ones that were in charge, and basically will be in charge of the whole world during the times of Christ. But John again broke with the conservative or a chasm party, and the closing years of John's reign marked a change in the family politics. And here too, the Maccabean rulers had been at the head, or as it's Chasm, or most zealous religious party. And so they had been the backbone of the Maccabean power. So the reasons for the break with the party were that the Pharisees were jealous of the fact that John was both the governor and the high priest. John invited the Pharisees to the feast, and he invited them to point out anything that he was doing not in keeping with the law. At the feast, a Pharisee by the name of Eleazar said that John ought to content himself with the government of the people and not occupy the office of the high priest. And so John asked for a reason. And Eleazar said that he understood that John's mother had been captive under Antiochus Epiphanes IV. So this carried the idea that she had been abused and that John's lineage would be in question. This report, though, was false. So John was greatly angered, and the other Jews appeared to be angered also. So a Sadducee by the name of Jonathan told John Hyrcanus that the feeling expressed by Eleazar was actually the feeling of all the Pharisees. And if John Hyrcanus waited to know how they really felt, he should ask them what punishment they thought Eleazar deserved. So according to the law, if one speaks evil of the ruler of the people, he was to be put to death. But if one were guilty of a lesser offense, he deserved stripes and bonds. So the Pharisees for Eleazar recommended stripes for him there and bonds. And so thus showing that they did hold John Hyrcanus in the high esteem that would be expected. So this so angered John that he joined with the Sadducees, according to Josephus. So within 100 years of the Advent, that would be the alliance was formed between the ruling family and the cultural classes, between the royal and priestly house on the one side and the representatives of the Greek culture and worldly fanaticism on the other. So the sight is a strange one. In other words, the grandson of Matthias was of the same count with the sons of those who, with a full face, had been ready to sacrifice to Zeus. So thus we read, then the high priest rose up and all that were with him, which is the sect of the Sadducees. So John, our Hyrcanus, left his sovereignty to his widow, his son, I hope I get this right, Aristobulus. Aristobulus. We named our son that and called him Bolus, Toby, Arius. But apparently he had made a estimate of his son's character because Arius Tobulus threw his mother in jail and starved her to death. Now, Judas Aristobulus the first, or Aristobulus the first, was the first Hasmonean king of Judah from 104 BCE until his death in 103 BCE. He was the eldest of the five sons of John Hyrcanus, previous leader. Now, Aristobulus, his Hebrew name was Judah. He also is referred to as Philhellenes, meaning he was an admirer of Greek culture. Now, you see, the mixture now is taking place. I mean, we probably would ask ourselves when we study Romans chapter 1 there and also the Corinthians, and probably maybe some of the others, why is it that the Jewish people have, taken on some of the culture that they have, but how is it that the Gentile people have such a culture? And it was different in just about every place you would go, they would have different things. And then you get to Acts chapter 17 about Athens and all the different gods. Well, here's what's been taking place in reference to that, because here was an admirer of that Greek culture. So through insane jealousy, he put his brother Antiochus to death. He reigned only 1 year, but he crowded crime enough to make himself unique in infamy, and he died from a disease in agonies of remorse. So Jonathan, the brother now of Aristobulus, succeeded to the throne in 105 BC and assumed the Greek name Alexander. Notice that. He added to this abbreviation form or his Jewish name, Janai. Now, Alexander Jannaeus, Jannaeus, also known as Alexander Janai, the Hebrew, born Jonathan. Jonathan Alexander was the second king of the Hasmonean dynasty who ruled over an expanding kingdom of Judea from 103. Now, notice the closeness to 76. They get closer and closer to the Roman Empire. And he says, a son of John Hyrcanus, he inherited the throne from his brother Aristobulus the first and married his brother's widow, Queen Salome, Alexandria, from his conquest to expand the kingdom to a bloody civil war. Alexander's reign had been generalized as cruel and oppressive with never-ending conflicts. So the major historical sources of Alexander's life are Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews and the Jewish Wars. You can read that if you like. The book, it's about an inch and a half thick. The kingdom of Alexander Jannaeus was the largest and strongest known Jewish state outside the biblical sources, having conquered most of Palestine's Mediterranean coastlands, the region surrounding the Jordan River. Alexander also made of his subjects killed for their disapproval of his handling of state affairs, and due to his territorial expansion and interactions with his subjects, he was continuously embroiled with foreign wars and domestic turmoil. Now that's according to Wikipedia. But I thought it was interesting to go back and to look at that. Okay, and guess what we did, Jim? Yeah, we recorded. Did we record? Yeah, we did. We did. Now we can pause it. We pause and take 15 minutes. Okay.
Okay, Bobby.
Record. Okay, we were talking about the kingdom of Alexander Jannaeus, and so he became known as in history as Alexander Jannaeus, and he reigned for 27 years, and his reign was one long story of border and civil war, of alternate success and defeat, of daring adventures and ruthless slaughter. He emerged as a hurly-burly of his many wars, with an enlarged territory embracing more than the original possessions of that of the 12 tribes. His enemies at home were harder to manage than his enemies abroad. As we talked about, again, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that quarrel between them raged at its worst during this time. And so Alexander Jannaeus threw himself wholly toward that of the Sadducees. And so one side, as we said earlier, you had uh, a priestly party based by the royal power, and on the other side you had the Puritan party backed by the popular sympathy. And then for 6 years you had a chronicle civil war that was raging. And Jannaeus revealed in faction and ferocity. So um, for the first time in history, we hear of a cross. Religious rancor first raised the cross at a drunken festival at Jerusalem. Jannaeus caused 800 leading Pharisees to be crucified. You see, really the problem between the Pharisees and Sadducees is just not their doctrinal belief. It's also dealt with that of vengeance on their part, in reference to what the Sadducees did in reference to the Pharisees, because Jannaeus was, like I said already, that he joined himself Sadducees. So it's estimated that no less than 50,000 were sacrificed in a suicidal strife. So Alexander Jannaeus on his deathbed counseled his wife to join with the Pharisees. Toward the close of his life, he seemed to have come to the conclusion that his policy toward the Pharisees had been a mistake. He counseled his widow, to whom he left the succession, to quit the alliance, and whose interest his crimes had been committed and his miseries endured, to join herself with the long oppressed Pharisee. And notice that, and we can remember that when we study Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and study the New Testament, that they had been oppressed. The Pharisees had. And so, in other words, to quit the priestly party and to embrace the popular party. So the counsel he gave was wise. Salome Alexandra succeeded to the throne as queen in her own right. And Queen Alexandria was nearly 70 years old when she began to reign. She was the widow of two Hasmonean rulers, Aristobulus and Alexander Jannaeus, respectfully. And so she reigned probably for 9 years. Royal power, popular power, were now won, and the Sadducees were pounded between them. And so her brother Simon, or Simeon, was one of the leading Pharisees, and he now became the most foremost man of the realm. He exalted the Pharisaic faction to a supremacy which it never lost till the kingdom itself was lost. The queen determined the counselors and friends of her late husband the measure of fate they had previously meted out to the others. So till her death in 70 BC, Queen Alexander held the reins of the government wisely and firmly. She was her chief anxiety came from her sons. And so, in other words, she had some problems with them. But Queen Alexander's eldest son was named Hyrcanus. The priesthood was conferred on him, and he was without energy. He was inoffensive, but indesolate, that is, and incapable. So, though harmless, he was a ready tool for the unscrupulous. So here comes Queen Alexander's second son, whose name was Aristobulus. He was counterpart of his father. And so he was bold in enterprise and inaccurate in manner and barbaric in nature. He soon set himself in opposition to his mother and his counselors. He saw in the Sadducee faction the elements out of which he might mount to power at the expense of his weakling brother. He threw the shield of his rank over them, and they became his instrument. Now you can see it, how all this is taking place. He hoped to win a crown, and they hoped to win a revenge. And its real result was the overthrow of the national independence, extinction of the Maccabean dynasty. So a civil war broke out between the two sons of Queen Alexandra. So now I see here again as we've often said, here they are fighting amongst themselves again, rich people. So on the death of Alexander, a civil war between the brothers broke out. Alexander should be. Um, it broke out. A civil war broke out between them. And Aristobulus was soon proved his superiority over his brother Hyrcanus, who was the legitimate heir. So a compromise was reached. Now, Hyrcanus willingly consented to surround his throne on conditions of being allowed to retain the family wealth in a dignified position, according to Josephus. On the side of Hyrcanus was an Idumean officer of wealth and prestige named Antipius or Antipater. Hope and ambition rested with the cause of Hyrcanus. The settlement meant the extension of his hopes and ambitions. So this Edomite Antipater had risen high in the service of Alexandra, and on her death, he had espoused the cause of the elderly brother. And then policy nor not fidelity had ruled his choice. And so, under the energetic Aristobulus, he could never hope for the position to which his ambition soared. On the other hand, Arcanus would be a king after his own heart. The Jew would reign, but the Idumean would rule and nothing less than mayor of the palace, as he aspired to be. He determined to prevent, therefore, to prevent a peaceful settlement between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. This Edomite, though, was the very embodiment of subtle, patient, untiring energy. He was passionless, but ceaselessly active. He was outwardly pious, but inwardly ruthless. He was gentle in manner, but inflexible in will. He was a man to be reckoned with in any age. His first object was to break the fraternal truce and let slip the dogs of war. Antipater persuaded the facile Hyrcanus to flee with him to seek the support of the powerful Artes and neighboring Arabian king. So ready for spoil, an Arab army soon poured upon unhappy Palestine. So here, because of the problems they were having between themselves, it caused a lot of problems for all of them. So Aristobulus was defeated in the battle, and he fled to Jerusalem. And once again, the city experienced a terrible siege. So during the bitter conflict, Onias was held in great repute because of the efficacy of his prayer in a time of drought, was brought forth by the besiegers and told to pray against the siege. And in his difficulty, the aged man knelt down and prayed. God, the King of the universe, since on one side are thy people, and on the other side thy priests, I beseech thee, hear not the prayers of either against the other. That was pretty good. So both Hyrcanus and Aristobulus appealed to Scaurus and the Roman general who had just captured Damascus. So Jerusalem was divided within. An unholy alliance existed without. And at this time, a new actor appeared on the scene. So Rome, the great republic of the West, had been embracing nation after nation. So Rome was now successfully closing a campaign against Asia Minor. And so Scaurus arrived at Damascus and captured it. Both brothers, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, solicited his intervention. And to clear the board, Scaurus ordered Artes, the Arab, to withdraw from Jerusalem, and Artes obeyed. And so Aristobulus fell upon his rear and rounded the retreating army. And so both Hyrcanus and Aristobulus next appealed to Pompey, the great Roman general. Right? Now we're getting close to that, bringing a Roman. So Pompey was one of the greatest and ablest and noblest of all the generals who ever led the armies of Rome. So his fame then filled the world. His star, however, was shortly set by the rising of the ever victorious son of Caesar. So each brother, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, appeared before Pompey. and to plead his right to the rule of the Hebrews. So Aristobulus appeared in a gorgeous, semi-barbaric splendor, and Hyrcanus was more prudent, attended by sober men, directed by the master spirit Antipater the Edomite. So it was a memorial occasion, Jews and Edomite Romans together. Pompey delayed his decision. Legitimacy and policy plainly pointed against Aristobulus. The elder brother's right of birth was unquestionable. The recognizing the strength of the case against him, so Aristobulus became impatient from waiting Pompey's decision and fled to Jerusalem and opened war against Hyrcanus and Pompey. So desperation, not hope, prompted him. The Jews vindicated their right to the crown of valor. So the Romans, theirs of success. So the city fell, and and with it fell forever all that was worthy of the name of national independence. Pompey even entered into the temple. The Jews were filled with unspeakable horror. So Pompey was astonished when within he found no statue, no idol, no visible object of worship of any sort. Disappointed and wholly puzzled, he retired from the Holy of Holies. Pompey's profanity in entering within the veil of the temple called forth the Jewish highest indignation. And so his conduct in every respect commanded their grateful admiration. And so he ordained to lay unholy hands upon holy money and left things as he found them. He gave direction that the action necessary to purify the temple from the condemnation or contamination of his presence should duly be performed. So he appointed Hyrcanus to be high priest, but deprived him of the title of king. He prescribed an annual tribute, and he demolished the fortifications of Jerusalem and of other stronghold places that they would have. He stripped Judea of all the territories acquired by the conquest of the Maccabees, and he left the high priest nothing save the narrow limits of the old kingdom of Judah. So Samaria is in the center of that of Galilee, and on the north, the Transjordic territories of the east, Edom and Philistine. On the south, all these were captured off or caped off. So Hyrcanus became high priest, ethnarch of a territory not more than 1/10 of that which his father had been king. And so now we're going to see, as when we turn to that of the New Testament, how everything is kind of divided up. But it all came because of what happened between the testaments. So the end results of civil war was tragic, except for Rome. Only one man really gained. He was Antipater, the Idumean plotter. Pompey returned to Rome and celebrated the most wonderful triumph which even Rome had ever seen. He had captured 1,000 castles, 900 cities, 800 galleys, and have refounded 900 cities. Now in Rome, 362 princes marched before Pompey's jeweled car. Now that's a chariot. Among them was Aristobulus, the late king of the Jews. In previous times, the captive princes were actually led to execution. And so here, Pompey was humane enough and strong enough to break the cruel custom. Some he sent home, some he kept in captivity in Rome. Aristobulus was too unreliable, too dangerous, and he was thus kept in captivity in Rome. And the year was 63 BC. The Roman was at the gate. Idumean was nigh the throne. So we see as it comes all the way down through there in reference to what's taking place. So it leads us to the Idumean and our Roman period is the next in order of the world events that we're looking at, particularly affected that of the Hebrews. Now we turn to them. First of all, let us consider the circumstances leading to an Idumean becoming the king of the Jews. The great triumph of Pompey drew attention of that of the Roman people. Politicians to Palestine in a way wholly new. And so here the king of Israel, king of Jerusalem, and his son Antigonus, I think that's what he said, Antigonus. were the most gazed at all the 36 princes who preceded the conqueror's car. The Maccabees had ever been famed for their beauty of face and dignity of bearing. So in Aristobulus, the Roman saw a man who to the outward eye was every inch a king. So the crowd whispered um, strange tales concerning the Jewish people. Many thousands of the Jews had been taken captive and many were sold. Many, however, were liberated but forced to settle in Rome. So these originated in the Jewish colony in the imperial city. So it soon grew to a vast size. Also, you stop and think and remember that we had a dispersion, that is, where the people were dispersed back earlier between that of the Assyrian and also the Babylonian captivity. And so now you have all this taking place. And so the year was 63 BC. It was the year of the first of the three great Roman captures of Jerusalem. Cicero was hurling the thunderbolts of his eloquence against the battered conspirator Catiline. And Julius Caesar had been elected Pontifex Maximus. And so Pompey was, for the time, the foremost man in the world. Hyrcanus was a titular high priest. Palestine was really, though not nominal, a Roman province. And Aristobulus, the brilliant but unreliable, was an honored prisoner at Rome. So now the Jews did not submit to their laws of liberty without a struggle. In the last 2 years, there were repeated popular risings, multiplied massacres. And so Alexander, the son of Aristobulus, escaped from Rome, the Romans. And so he had made his escape while on his way to Rome with his father and brother. So he had married the daughter of Hyrcanus. I can't say his name. Thus, in himself, he could claim to represent both branches of the royal house, that is, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So in this character, he commanded the popular sympathy and soon found himself at the head of a large force. He displayed traditional courage and that of energy, and for a time, he made successful headway against the Romans and their Judean allies. About this time, though, we find Aristobulus and his older son, Antigonus, escaped from Rome and renewed the struggle. So about this time, civil war breaks out between Caesar and Ptolemy. And so Aristobulus thought that under the patronage of Caesar, he might recover the throne. Hyrcanus and Antipater took the side of their patron, Pompey. About this time, Aristobulus' career ended by poison. Also, the gallant Alexander was beheaded by the Romans, and Antigonus was alone, was left. So Hyrcanus, the two of Antipater, and Antigonus, the son of Aristobulus, were left. So Antigonus took that side, as we said, of that of Pompey, called himself Matthias, thus appealing to the heroic memory of the name. And so other the Asmonean line, it began with a Matthias and ended with a Matthias. And so Antigonus held the victory of Caesar over Pompey and at Phasca, as he preluded to his own victory over Hyrcanus and Antipater. So he confidently reckoned that Caesar would reverse the policy of Pompey, but the Idumean Antipater forestalled him. Hasted to victory, Antipater rendered himself efficient service in his Egyptian campaign and completely won his confidence. So no matter which side was uppermost at Rome, the Edomite knew bow to win. At this point, Antipater passes out of sight. He too was poisoned. They had to learn had to learn watch what they drank. Made room for a greater, that's Herod, his son, which we read about in the New Testament. So next, let us consider the circumstances that led to Herod's becoming king of the Jews. So Cassius came from Rome and oppressed Judah. And Antipater appointed Malichus to extract taxes from the Jews, and Malichus provoked Caius's anger. Um, something there, move something. His anger for his failure to perform, and Cassius would have killed Malichus, but had not Hyrcanus, by the means of Antipater, set him 100 talents of his own. So Malichus then laid snares and later poisoned Antipater. So Meg gives us a good hint about all this poisoning, thinking that Antipater's death would be the preservation of the Hyrcanus government. But Cassius of Rome sent Herod word that he should avenge his father's death, and he commanded his army at Tyre to assist. So Herod arranged to quietly steal Malichus away and march him. And so some characteristics of Herod was he was a magnificent presence. He possessed great strength and culture. And we would find also he was a master of the martial or all the martial and mainly exercises. He was a versatile genius. He was possessed to an energy that knew no fatigue. He was a man who would have made his mark in any condition of life. He was a great administrator as a lad, as governor of Galilee. And after Antipater's death, he and his brother Phasael, between whom a devoted attachment existed. And sometimes that's kind of rare because, again, we have noticed that all the killing has been done among that of the families. And so, yet they did have this good relationship with one another. And but as often his resourcefulness and diplomacy actually triumphed. So Herod's first danger was the civil war between Brutus and Caius. Caius, put I in there, on the one side, and Mark Antony and Octavius Caesar on the other. So here they're at war. And so civil war was arose at the assassination of Julius Caesar. Herod was compromised by being on the losing side. Following the course of his father Antipater, Herod had ended to Anthony, won his confidence and established a lasting friendship, and he returned to Palestine with the imperator of the world's masters upon his enterprise. So here it is, Antigonus, the son of Aristobulus, in the meantime, had called in the army of the Parthians to his aid. Again, every time I see those names, I kind of think of Acts chapter 2, where it lists all these different people came from these different areas, like the Parthians. So the host overran and devastated that Palestine. And the elder's brother, Pharisal, was captured and in despair died by his own hand. And so the victorious Antigonus mutilated his uncle Hyrcanus so as to render him unfit for the priesthood and sent him back a prisoner with the Parthians to Babylon. So here Herod escapes, carrying with him the family of Alexander. Now, Alexander was the brother of Antigonus and the son of Aristobulus, to whom reference had already been made. So Alexander's children were a son, Aristobulus, and a daughter, Mary Amini. And I looked everywhere for her in reference to the spelling of her name, because I would see Mary Ann, but Mary Amne. She was judged to be the most beautiful woman of the age. She had already won and ever retained the love of Herod. And so Herod made his way to Rome, and in the character of a protector of the young Aristobulus, he claimed from his patron Anthony the support of the Roman arms. And so Anthony was willing to give to his friend Herod what he was not willing to give to an unknown stripling. And so we find Herod entered Rome as a vowed advocate of another, and left it in the character of the king of the Jews. But he was a king without a kingdom. Antigonus was in possession of patriots. So a war followed like that of wild beasts to that of fury. So we find that Herod created forces by the fame of his genius, his genius, fertility of his promises. So in the midst of this war, he found time to wed Mary Anne. Uh, so if anything could reconcile the people to his kingship, it would be that the beauteous Maccabean would be thus the queen. Only after several desperate campaigns was the way cleared to that of the capital, and at length Jerusalem was invested by a combined Roman and Herodian army and experienced the horrors of a siege. So after 6 months, Jerusalem fell. The Romans avenged their toils and losses by pillage and massacre, and that it threatened to leave Herod neither capital nor subject. Therefore, he is maybe a king, but he didn't have a kingdom. So at last, Herod's uh, indignant. I mean, there it is. I got the wrong thing. Indignant remonstrances stopped the slaughter. So Herod was ruthless. He became he put to death Antigonus, and the son of Aristobulus. And we would find that Herod uh, was he swept from his path all who opposed him. He put all the Sanhedrin, save three, to death. That was 70, 67. Sanhedrin was composed of the Sadducees. Antigonus had surrendered, and Antigonus requested to be put to death by Anthony. So only three of the Maccabean line now survived. And so they were the aged Hyrcanus, who had found refuge among the Babylonian Jews, and whose ears had been cut off by Antigonus, and Alexander's young son, Aristobulus, and Alexander's daughter, Mariamne, who was Aristobulus' sister and Herod's wife. They were the only ones left. So Herod, again, now he invites that of Hyrcanus back to Jerusalem, receives him with honor, calls him father, and even professed to give him precedence over him in rank. The first victim of remaining the Maccabeans was Aristobulus. He was 18 years of commanding stature and noble hearing. The majesty beauty of the Maccabean family reached its climax in Aristobulus and Mariamne. Mariamne. That's the way Mariamne. The race was destined to die out in its fairest flowers, and so she had prevailed upon Herod to name her brother to the high priest, and so Aristobulus was accordingly installed into peerless dignity. And so the applause of the people was great. The applause of Herod's jealous here caused Aristobulus to be accidentally drowned while swimming with Herod's acquaintances. Sounds like the mafia. The next victim to fall was Hyrcanus, now only Mariamne, if you were to say her that way. I think that's got Annie. It's got to be a M though. It can't be an N. It has to be an M. I looked it up. And was left. And so Herod was found on the losing side in the civil war between Anthony and Octavius Caesar. So he chose the side of Anthony, and Octavius Caesar won. And so Herod had the facility of being on the losing side. He hastened to Caesar and reminded him of his friendship with Anthony, promised Caesar the same fidelity. So he was turned to the extent of his service to Caesar's enemy in part of part into an argument for Caesar's friendship for the future. So Caesar received him with a great distinction and permitted him to return to Palestine with unimpaired position and enlarged territory. So thus the Herodian sun ride prosperously through every cloud. And so Herod lived and reigned without challenge for 28 years afterwards. His government was vigorous but severe. He fostered learning. He was an architectural genius. He had ambitions to appear another Solomon, so he built magnificent temples He didn't build a palace for himself. He surpassed Solomon in both. And Herod's palace was for hospitality to others, the entertaining of strangers of distinction visiting the city. The heathen strain would cut through, introduced Romans' names, or he would introduce Romans' names and symbols, and and often offended that of the Jews. And so Herod became a very jealous and suspicious man. He loved his wife passionately, but he gave orders that she should he die, she was to die also. And so Mary's love did not survive when she learned of her husband's cruelties toward her family and her family. And so we would find that she held a contempt for Salome, the sister-in-law and Herod's sister. And Salome dwelt on the note that no one loved Herod as she did. So maddened by frenzied anger and suspicion, Herod caused his wife to be tried and condemned. So Herod was approaching death, and Alexandra, the mother of Mary, way I'm gonna say it, Maria, that name gets me. He ain't plotted for Maria these sons to ascend to the throne. So Herod calls Alexander and everyone under suspicion to be put to death. And so later the sons of Mary and me were subjected to a mock trial and were condemned and put to death by strangling. And so, as after the death of the mother, Herod's remorse was as violent as his crime was incredible. The third son now plotted for the throne and was wearied that his father, in a rotted mass, continued to live. And Herod's suffering, he devised a scheme to compel a national mourning by the slaughter of all the chief men of the nation at the very moment of his death. So amid these circumstances, the star in the east appeared. It is no wonder that the slaughter of the innocent of Jerusalem should escape the notice of that of Josephus. What were a dozen peasant babies when the highest heads of the government were fallen, of the kingdom were fallen, or had been set for that of slaughter? So we find that he doesn't say anything about what Herod is having done in that of Jerusalem and those of the babies. That brings us to that of Unit 4, and also brings us to Daniel chapter 11 and verse 2 in the Old Testament. Or read this once. We find this is a historical survey of, let me see how much time we got. I didn't look at that. A historical survey of the Hebrew people from the rise of Alexander the Great. Now, this is the Hebrew people to his arrival. We've looked at the world. Now we're going to look at the Hebrew people of Alexander the Great to his arrival at Jerusalem. So we have observed that Xerxes, 486 to 465 BC, that is 21 years, stirred up all Greece, which was in keeping with Daniel's prophecy. In Daniel 11, verse 2, it says, "And now I will show thee the truth, because behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, though his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece." That's Xerxes. Now, we'll make mention of some issues that comes up with these names, okay? He was the springboard. That is, he simply was going to lay the foundation for the rise of Alexander the Great. So Xerxes intensified the rise of Alexander by his invasion of Greece with an army of by 5 million men. I said before, that was a lot of people. Now, Alexander the Great and his army crossed the Hellespont and invaded Persia in 334 BC. So Alexander's army met Darius III's army at the river Granicus, and the Persian army was defeated. The date was 332 BC. So we have observed that during the Persian period, that is 536 to 332 BC, that Greece was composed of independent city-states, separate from its neighbors by mountains, and each community become a separate political unit. The city, a center of government and trade, together with the surrounding countryside, constituted a city-state. Can't believe that I did not put city-state there in capital. And especially because on this computer, like on all of them that has Microsoft, you have a thing up there that says editor, and you go into that and you can put in capital city state and it'll look them all up and you can change it. It didn't change. I know that I did it. But in the city, the political life of a community was centered. And we would find that here the citizens from the countryside met. And as we said, here was the marketplace, and here was the shops of craftsmen, and here was the walls of defense. Here were the government buildings and temples. So we have observed that from the time of Xerxes' exit, Xerxes, Xerxes, Persia continued to be a threat to Greece, although it made no further invasion into Greece. And so Persia, by its mere proposition, Xerxes, he said, by its mere position alone, posed a constant threat to Greece. So in addition, Persia bribed and otherwise induced the larger city-states to take up arms and take the side of the Persian Empire. So we have observed that the pressing problem of Greece was the need for a unification of those city-states. So this need ascribed the attention that the Grecian philosophers, particularly Plato and uh, Socrates. Now, Socrates, 436 to 338 BC, um, urged that Greece represent the highest civilization in the world and that the city-states should cease to fight each other and that they should be united in a common aim against Persia. And so we look, and so we have observed that Alexander received the inedible education at the feet of Aristotle, 335, 322 BC. So we have observed that the circumstances of the assassination of his father, King of Macedonia, left Alexander in a strategic position to unify Greece, which thing he immediately moved to do. And so he was listening to that of the philosopher. So next tells us about Alexander's succeeds to the throne of Macedonia in 336 BC. Alexander realized that he was in peril on every side. The unsubdued northern tribes, northern tribes, and from Greece itself and from that of Asia. So he considered that his most important task was to consolidate his position as the head of the League of Corinth. And now he lost no time in starting for Thessaly. So aware that the descendant troops would gather to prevent his passage through the formidable pass of Tempe, he could step up the high mountain of Ossa. And so with the ladder of Alexander, he turned the dangerous defile and descended to the plain beyond the enemy without having to strike one blow. So the fine Thessalian, the cavalry, became his possession. To an assembly of the Thessalian nobility, he explained that he desired to be recognized as head of the League of Corinth in the place of his father. So he promised the Thessalians that the following. He says, first of all, that he would protect their country. Second, he says that he would carry out the invasion of Persia contemplated by his father. And third, that he would share with them the booty which might come with the war with Persia. So the outcome of the meeting was that all adjoining states agreed to acknowledge the position of Alexander as the head of the League of Corinth. So at Thermopylae, Alexander was unopposed. And so here Alexander convoked, here's this big old long word, amphitonic council, combination of states is the idea, okay? And was appointed Herod of Greece in the place of Philip, his father. So no representatives came from Thebes or Athens. Now, Demosthenes continued to invade against that of Alexander, but no fortifications were prepared against a possible attack on that of Athens. Now, Sparta, though, refused to join the league. And at Corinth, Alexander was met only by the politicians, but also by the artists and the thinkers who desired to converse with a king who had been a pupil of Aristotle. They were amazed. So Alexander then marched to that of Dabi, where he met with a victor on both sides of the river. And Alexander turned south to deal with two Iranian armies, and with much ingenuity obtain another victor. And so during the delay caused by the northern campaign, rumors spread that Alexander had been killed, and uh, Demo, Demosthenes produced a witness who was certain that Alexander had been wounded and could not recover. And so Thebes claimed independence. Other Greek cities promised to aid her against Macedonian supremacists. But Alexander realized the seriousness of the import of all this news that was given out that he was killed. So choosing the route over the high hills, he hurriedly moved his army with in a fortnight. Before anyone had heard of this approach, he encamped some 6 miles from Thebes, and the rapidity, his rapid response would be the best way to put it, of the march struck Athens with dismay. And so Athens, my Athens is misspelled, so let me change that. Was recalled the troops that she had sent to aid Thebes, and so she decided to await the results. And so Thebes found out all her promises, promised allies had vanished. So she feared that the Procrans and the Platines and the other Boeotians would whom they had ruled with severity would assist Alexander. So Alexander was loth to fight Thebes, and so twice Thebes had defeated Sparta. Alexander postponed attacks and awaited an apology for murder for the two of his officers, and Thebes refused to apologize. So every conciliatory approach that Alexander made was rejected. Now, Alexander prepared to attack the city, so no one believed for a moment that so young a general would win a contest with that of Thebes. Perdiccas found a weakly guarded position in the wall. Though gravely wounded, Perdiccas drove the Thebans to the temple of Hercules. The Dadmen garrison swept down to aid them, and a terrible slaughter ensued, and the Theban cavalry fled early in the combat as they were powerless in the city. So at nightfall, a halt to the struggle was called. Now, members of the League of Taurian, of which Alexander is head, mine flashed. I don't know what's going on. Flashed again. To conference, and were told that the surrender under the cruelty of Thebes, they had the right to declare the punishment. So they demanded that the city should be razed to the ground. And so Alexander unwillingly consented on the condition that the house of Pindar, the poet, and the temple should be spared. Record states that the ruin was carried out by the Boeotians and others who had long grown under Thebes' dominion. So the devastation of Thebes made a profound impression upon Alexander. The memory of the toll of death and slavery troubled his conscience for many years. Asia, when Theban mercenaries were taken prisoner, special leniency was always shown toward them. So terrible as it had been, the price of Thebes paid, the results of her fate was that all other cities hastened to submit to that of Alexander. And so Alexander showed the greatest clemency to all, and Athens was afraid of what might happen to her. So Alexander, though, loved Athens. And so, again, we get a picture of what Athens is like when we read Acts chapter 17. So he made no demands except that 9 men inveigled against him should be delivered up as hostages. And the Demosthenes, or the Demosthenes, was one of the 9 men. After some discussion, Alexander was persuaded to modify those terms, and he exacted that only one man, that is Cardamus, should be exiled, and Cardamus escaped to Persia and joined with Darius. So thus, Alexander, at the age of 20, within 1 year, had made himself master of Greece. And so the road now seemed clear to prepare for the expedition to Asia. And so Alexander in 334, now he invades Persia. So he crossed the Hellespont in 334 BC to invade and to conquer Persia. And then a close fight ensued between Alexander's army and Darius's thirds at the river Germanicus, or as we would say, Granicum, and the Alexander won. Darius III, though, did not take the expedition seriously. The army he sent consisted of an army of Persia cavalry and Greek mercenaries and native troops, and Alexander, on gaining the victory, ordered the great Greek mercenaries massacred as traitors to that of the Greek cause. And so the Greek cities of Asia Minor were taken next and liberated in many instances against the will. Now, the next serious challenge to Alexander uh, uh, was the conquest. Challenge to his conquest, Alexander's conquest, was at the Cilician Gate at Issac. Now, Darius had advanced with his Persian army. The Persians fell back before Alexander and Damascus was taken. The Phoenician cities, except for Tyre, surrendered and were occupied. So on the two occasions, Darius III offered to negotiate with Alexander. He offered Alexander territory, a large sum of money, and the hand of his daughter in return for his family, who had been taken captive at the fall of Damascus. Alexander refused, and already decided on a policy of world conquest. And so we don't know why that he would refuse that, because in other times that we find that that was granted, but Alexander was not going to do that. It may be because of history. When you look back, those people became a problem. So Tyre was next to fall, having resisted Alexander for 7 months. So in the meantime, Sanballat, the Samaritans, on seeing that Alexander was being victorious in his campaigns, turned his loyalty from Darius to Alexander, and on doing so, Sanballat requested permission to build a rival temple in Jerusalem. And the request was granted, and the temple was built in Mount Gerizim. Remember that what happens at Mount Gerizim later in reference to Samaria, according to Josephus. And some reflections just here are in order, and some of these we've already made. Cyprus ruled Babylon for his last 10 years, 558 529 BC, or 29 years. And Babylon fell in 538 to 536 BC. And Cambius, 592 522 BC, ruled on for 7 years. Pseudo-Smyrtus, 522 to 521 BC, ruled for 8 months. And Darius Hystaspes, 521 to 486 BC, ruled for 21 years. So Artaxerxes, Manus, ruled for 41 years. Now, again, like I said, we've gone over this before, but in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, Nehemiah became governor of Judah with a commission to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. In the 32nd year of the reign of Artaxerxes, Nehemiah returned to Shushan, and according to Josephus, Manasseh, who married Sanballat's daughter, went to Sanballat and told him that although he loved his wife, Nikasa, yet he was not willing to be deprived of the sacerdotal dignity of her account. So whereupon Sanballat promised to build a temple like the one in Jerusalem, Mount Gerizim, and to make Manasseh the high priest. So Sanballat promised that he would do this with the appropriation of that of King Darius. But we would find that in the meantime, many of the priests and Levites revolted to Manasseh, for Sanballat offered them money and divided among them land for tillage and habitations also in other areas. And so we would find, to gratify his son-in-law, about that same time, 334 BC, Darius heard how Alexander had passed over the Hellespont and had won a victory at Granicum. And Darius went to Asu of Cilicia to meet Alexander, whereupon Sanballat was glad. And so he told Manasseh that he would perform his promise as soon as Darius had come back after defeated the enemy. So all in Asia were persuaded that the Macedonians would never fight the Persians because of their multitude, but Darius lost the battle and fled into Persia. So Alexander came in Syria. Sanballat renounced Darius and taken with him 7,000 of his own subjects and delivered them to Alexander. So Alexander received him kindly, whereupon Sanballat requested Alexander's permission to build the proposed rival temple. Alexander gave permission to Sanballat to do so. Now, if the temple was not built until the time of Alexander, 332 BC, it did not exist until about 100 years after Manasseh. Okay. Now, Josephus does not agree with what Nehemiah says. So that is thus it is difficult to make a consistent and clear account of the matter of Josephus. It is doubtful that the temple, and we mentioned this before, but now a little bit more about it. It's doubtful that the temple was built in the days of Manasseh. He probably labored to unite the people, including the Malcontinent Jews, and who had joined them in that of a common worship. So this temple, once built, stood until the time of John Hyrcanus in 129 BC. So it was built. Then Gaza, after a 2-month siege, fell, and Alexander was wounded during the battle, as we mentioned. Alexander then marched on to Jerusalem by Judea, the high priest, by Judah, the high priest, as well as the people. And so while Tyre was under siege, Alexander sent an epistle to the Jewish high priest to send him some auxiliaries and to supply his army with provisions, and that he should never repent of doing so. So Judah the high priest replied that he had given his oath to Darius not to bear arms against him, and he said that he would not transgress this while Darius was in the land of the living. Alexander was very angry, and so he threatened that he would make an expedition against the Jewish priests, and through him teach all men to whom they must keep their oaths. So then Alexander had taken Gaza. He made haste to go to Jerusalem. So here's Jerusalem in the middle, as we've seen over and over. Now Judah the high priest was in agony and under terror, not knowing how he should meet the Macedonians. So Judah ordained that the people should join in him in supplications and offering sacrifice unto that of God. So whereupon God warned Judah in a dream that he should take courage and adore the city and open the gates, that the rest should appear with white garments, but that he and the priest should meet the king in the habits out proper to their order, within the dread of any ill consequences. In other words, he says, I'm not going to do this, but then God says, this is what you need to do. So Judah went out in procession with the priests and the multitude of the citizens to the chagrin of that of the Phoenicians and the Chaldeans, who expected to have opportunity to plunder the city. Alexander approached by himself and first saluted the high priest. Alexander, in justification for his seemly adoration for the high priest, declared, I saw this very person in a dream, in this very habit, when I was at Dios in Macedonia. Alexander came to the city, and when he went into the temple, he offered sacrifice to God according to the high priest's directions. He magnificently treated both the high priest and the priests. The book of Daniel was shown to him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of Persia, and that he supposed that himself was that person, and that he was glad and dismissed the multitude for the present. Next day, Alexander called to Judah and the priests and bid them ask what favor they pleased of him, and whereupon the high priest desired that they might enjoy the laws of their forefathers and might pay no tribute in the 7th year. And Alexander granted all that they desired. Judah, the priest, they treated Alexander that he would permit the Jews in Babylon and Media to enjoy their own laws, and Alexander willingly promised to do hereafter that they desired. Many of the Jews were readily accompanied Alexander in his wars, and so all that material is taken from Josephus. And as we said before, some people do not count it historical. Some say it's unhistorical. So the Egyptian welcomed Alexander as a deliverer. Now, what time it is? Oh, let me get number 29. The Egyptian welcomed Alexander as a deliverer. Alexander entered the temple of Ammon with where the oracle announced that Alexander was the son of Ammon and that he would conquer the world. Now, the administration, as we think about the administration of Egypt, was recognized, and the Egyptians were given a large share of the control of their country. The new city of Alexander was the enduring monument to the Macedonian conquest of Egypt, and so it replaced Tyre as a commercial metropolis of the Eastern Mediterranean, and Jewish colonists were encouraged to settle in Alexandria. Their presence in Alexandria was to have an important bearing on the subsequent history of Judaism and that of Christianity. In 331 BC, Alexander retraced his northward through that of Palestine and Syria on the Mesopotamian plain at Arbela in the Battle of Galgamia, and Alexander marched on until he had taken the entire history of Persia, territory of Persia. capitals of the Persian Empire, Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana were successfully occupied. With the conquest of Persia behind, Alexander continued his eastward conquests and Bactria and Sogdiana, Russian Turkey, Pakistan were next components. And so this is what he would do. He was going to take them, just like he's done the others, gone from place to place. So this conquest cost him 3 years of bitter fighting. And so as a gesture of reconciliation, Alexander married Roxana and the Bactrian princess. The Punjab region of India was the limit of Alexander's conquest, and his army refused to travel any further. Now, a lot of that is, and most of it is something that we've already covered. We have to look at that because from the standpoint that it takes place. And so we will continue there, Lord willing, next week. Any questions? No questions. All right. We'll end our meeting. Have a good night. God bless.
Thanks a lot, Bobby. I'll see you on Sunday.
All right.
Have a good day tomorrow, your last day on therapy.
I hope so. I take my nap, and then I got work to do if it don't rain.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Take care, Bobby.